Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 130, Categorizing Revision Tasks. For this episode, we do have a couple of slides, mainly for me to show a grid that categorizes revisions into 4 different types of tasks. For those of you listening on audio only, I'll make sure that I describe the 4 quadrants of this grid. It's a pretty simple image for today. So episode 130 came about because I have been dealing with several different types of revisions. I mentioned several episodes ago, I was working on some revisions for a book project. I also have an edited collection project with 2 other co-editors that is undergoing some revision of an introduction. So that's not a whole book, it's just a part of a book. And then I still have another journal article that I'm in the process of revising. So revision's been on my mind a lot lately. And at the end of this particular episode, I will make sure to share a link with you for a revision playlist I made of all the videos we have on our Defend, Publish, and Lead podcast so far about revision. We have lots of playlists. We have some that are focusing more on dissertations. We have some that focus on writer's block. So if you're interested, you can check those out. We'll make sure we put links to all of those in the show notes. But for categorizing revision tasks, I tend to think of revisions in 4 categories. And I know that there's been a lot of advice out there about how to approach a revision. So for example, you might have submitted a journal article and now have a revise and resubmit that you need to complete. So you need to revise your essay according to what the reviewer said and then resubmit it. And sometimes this will take the form that you'll get 2 different reviews back from 2 different reviewers, plus maybe the editor will have their own spin on how to address these reviews. We've all heard many times about reviewer 2 or a negative review that you might have to do some things in there that maybe you don't want to do. But what really I think is most helpful here is not necessarily going through review by review and checking off each task as you go. Primarily, this is because sometimes the 2 reviewers will agree on things, but one will have a better way to do it or will have more concrete suggestions. So even though you're going to address something that will make both reviewers happy, you want to use the feedback from reviewer 2, perhaps. Other times you don't want to go just in the order of the reviews, is that sometimes they can contradict each other. Sometimes one review will have better information about one part of your submission, and another review will have better information about how to do a different part. So you might be using various pieces. And third, there is always the editor's stamp of some sort. Sometimes the editor will just say the reviews are attached and there's no stamp whatsoever. But some editors will say, as you can see, both reviewers agreed on the need for stronger organization in the methodology section, or whatever it is that they wanted. So I think it's really helpful to look at these 3 or more reviews, however many you have, to pull them out and categorize what the reviews are asking for in 4 categories. So what's showing on the screen right now is just a quick grid of 4 ways to think through these revisions. And so I tend to think of these rather than just easy and hard. I tend to think how much tinkering I'm going to have to do in the draft to make it happen. So for example, I might have some revisions. This is the first of the 4 categories. I might have some revisions that only have to take place in one place only, and they're easy to do. For example, I have the wrong year on a source. I have a typo. The reviewer asked me to explain a quotation. Another reviewer asked me to add an example after I talked about a piece of data or something like that. So they're things that I know how to do. I can do them. They won't take too long, and they're only going to happen one place in the manuscript. So maybe twice if we're talking about adding a source. So you'd have to add it inside the manuscript itself and then again in your references. But in general, they're kind of one time only, one place only fixes, and they're not too difficult. The second level up, so this would be the second of 4, would be things that are in multiple places or that are easy to do. So if we think about this, here would be something that I just did for a book project. I changed terminology. So I had 3 categories and I renamed all 3 categories. that's something I needed to change all the way through the manuscript. So it needed to happen in multiple places, but it was relatively easy to do it. I could, do find and replace for the most part, and certainly I had to look for variations on these terms. But it did have to happen all the way through. So notice I didn't say anything about time. So that revision probably took me 3 to 4 days to catch all the instances in an 80,000 word manuscript. It took a while. So it's not that it was a short thing that I could just knock off my list quickly, but it was easy. I could just go page by page, very methodically. Methodically. I can't say that word today on this podcast. Whatever. Yeah, everybody's going to try to say it now. Try to say that yourself aloud. It's pretty funny. But this is something that I tried to do, have a very clear system about how I was going to do it. Another thing that sometimes will happen all the way through a manuscript, but is relatively easy. It's time consuming, perhaps boring if you're not using a citation manager, but maybe changing from Chicago style to APA or MLA to APA or whatever it is you have to do. If you're doing it by hand, it's tedious and long. And for the record, we do have some people that will come to us at Defend, Publish, and Lead and ask if we do that. We do. There may be cheaper ways to do that versus using one of our coaches to do it, but there's certainly, that's an option if you want. Another one would be updating verb tense. Some journals will require that there's a past tense, and that would depend on certainly your discipline and all that, whereas others want it framed in more current language. That's another thing that might happen across multiple places. So the difference between the first one, which is you only have to do it once and it's easy to do. The second level would be it's easy to do, but you have to do it in a lot of different places. And why we want to keep those revisions separate is that the things that are one place only and easy to do, you can do them and then cross them off your list. They are now finished. For things that are in multiple places that are easy to do, you can't cross that off the list till you've gotten through your whole manuscript, or wherever the multiple places are that it has to happen. The next level up would be things that are in one place only, but they're hard to do. So here would be some examples of that. And by hard, this is very relative, but to me, they would be things I can't tackle in a few minutes, right? So here would be an example. I'm working on a project right now where I need to explain methodology a little bit better. It's not that this is really hard to do. I think this will take me about 3 hours in this section of the manuscript because there's a bunch of moving parts that go with this explanation. So I know for me, that's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I only have to do it in the one place. So once I've done it, I'm finished. Some other things would be like redoing a figure. I had one of my figures in my book. Somebody had said it's kind of hard to understand the numbers across the bottom in relation to the things across the vertical axis. So I had to redo this figure and I had to put an explanation in there, and redoing the figure took a little bit of time. It was a little bit more difficult, but I could do it. It wasn't super tough to do. It just wasn't something that I could knock out. So it wasn't something that was easy to do. It requires more labor. And you certainly, if you want to, can sort these types of revisions into like easiest to hardest. So even if you're kind of calling them all a little bit more difficult to do, that would be a way to do it. Another thing might be adding a rationale for maybe a theory that you're using. That could be something that's a little bit more difficult to do, but you only have to do it in one place. And then finally, the last category would be something that has to happen in multiple places and is more difficult to do. So these could be a couple different things. They tend to be the very big pieces that will make the most difference in your manuscript. So for example, organization. I've had a couple of projects where the reviewers have said, we really like the arguments, we like the evidence, but we want a reorganization of points A, B, and C or something like that. So that's going to take me a lot longer because once I move one thing, other things have to move. Another thing to think about would be changing the framing of maybe an issue. So if I'm setting up maybe one of the issues that I'm trying to address with my work, I might have framed it in one way, but now I need to frame it through a different lens. That could happen in a couple different places in the manuscript, as can explaining why a problem you're looking to solve is a problem. Because it's not enough to just say it once at the beginning of the manuscript and call it a day. Usually you have to come back to it at the very least at a conclusion, and it might even be in abstract. So those are things to do. Another thing I know I had to do that was in multiple places and more difficult to do was to cut a source that was really fully integrated because I found something that worked a little bit better. But I had probably cited the source maybe 16 to 20 times, and it was really embedded in the manuscript. I referred to it, I had some interpretation of some quotations from it. So that would be the kind of thing that would be a spot in multiple places. So, if you're looking at YouTube and you're looking at this grid, you could decide to deal with everything that's one place only. So on the left half of the grid, we have one place only, easy to do in the top left-hand quadrant. And in the bottom left-hand quadrant, we have one place only and hard to do. You might decide everything that I only have to touch it once is what I'm going to tackle first. And then things that have to be done in multiple places, maybe you're going to tackle, the easiest to the hardest or the hardest to the easiest. There's no right answer here. I think whatever will get you motivated to get going, that would be what I'd recommend. And I know for me, what I tried to do was where I started my work was in this multiple places and easy to do. And why I picked that is because I had to look at something in multiple places that by necessity forced me to read the entire manuscript as I was doing it. So for example, when I was changing terminology, I had to read I had to kind of get a grip on all the pages in the manuscript. And that was a great refresh for me to figure out, well, if I have to fix something in one place that's easy to do or harder to do, where's that one place? So I could find it again and take notes and then figure out what I was going to do from there. Another place I have started with manuscripts is working in multiple places with something that's hard to do. Because if you have something that's multiple places and difficult to do, it might change the shape of the rest of your manuscript. So for example, that typo that the reviewer one mentioned might be gone now. So you might not be looking for it anymore. But really, there's no right answer. I think the thing to think about is these revisions as a group. So if you have some revision feedback back from reviewers, I would categorize it before you do anything. Go through reviewer one, go through reviewer two, and put all their suggestions in categories. If you want, these slides are available as part of the show notes. You're welcome to, pull the grid off of here, make your own grid. But I would recommend at least throwing them in categories so you sort of have a sense of what has to happen. And this can also serve as a revision checklist if you're interested. I also want to call your attention to a revision playlist that we put in YouTube. I have a shortened link showing here on the YouTube channel, so you're able to check out that link if you want to. You can also just go to Defend, Publish, and Lead podcasts and then hit playlists. You should be able to see revision playlist in there. We'll also have it in the show notes, and we're also tweeting them out on LinkedIn and Twitter, so you can catch them that way. But I encourage you to check out the playlist if you want to see some other things about it, because one is about using Asana to kind of manage all those pieces, many of which I talked about today. But there's also some good episodes in there about what happens if you're busy writing on another project, and then all of a sudden you have 2 weeks to do a revision on something that just came back. So there's some good advice there, along with how to just actually address or revise and resubmit once you get it. So how do you talk to the editor? How do you talk to the reviewers to do it? So I'm hoping this information was helpful, and happy writing this week.